Now, the Prime Minister of Tunisia, Youssef Chahid, is trying to calm anti-austerity protests. On Tuesday, he promised an end to the economic hardship a day after one demonstrator was killed in fighting with police. Since the Arab Spring began in late 2010, the government has struggled to cope with serious economic challenges. Now, the Arab Spring started with a popular uprising in Tunisia in December of 2010. Protests were staged against corruption, poverty, and political repression. The success of what became known as the Jasmine Revolution inspired a wave of similar anti-government protests throughout the Middle East and North Africa. But Tunisia hasn't suffered the kind of conflict that countries such as Libya, Syria, and Yemen have endured since the Arab Spring. Even so, profound difficulties persist. Many Tunisians feel their revolution is incomplete. On Monday, protests broke out in more than 10 cities across Tunisia. Anger has been building against price and tax hikes imposed by the government to reduce a ballooning deficit. Now, Tunisia's economy has been in crisis since the 2011 uprising and two terrorist attacks in 2015 that damaged tourism. The recent protests are much smaller than the turmoil experienced since the overthrow of President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali 7 years ago, but previous confrontations involving government and unions, as well as religious and secular forces, also started small before they escalated. Well, joining me now in the studio is our Ahmed Al-Burai, editor-at-large, to discuss what's happening in Tunisia a little bit further. So are we looking at a repeat of the escalating protests that we saw in Tunisia before? How far will these actually go?
Well, Andrea, the protests we are seeing nowadays are completely different from the turmoil that toppled Ben Ali in 2011. In terms of the size, it's much more smaller. In terms of the demands, they're completely different. It depends totally on the promises, as you've alluded in your intro, to the Chahid promises of reform, economic reform, and trying to kind of diffuse the tension in the streets, because there is a kind of a sentiment of anger, a sentiment of fury because of the ongoing hardship in terms of the economic, political and social conditions in Tunisia. The people feel that their revolution didn't harvest the fruit they were looking for. It's incomplete, especially among young people who talk to the street. They feel that they're completely marginalized, no employment, in addition to the increase of fuel, taxes, and even the accommodation. So the economic conditions are the main reason to trigger these kind of new protests in the streets in Tunisia.
And those are the frustrations and complaints we saw across the region that led to massive protests, not just in the Arab Spring, but in other cases as well. But why has Tunisia been different? What is it about this country that's kept these revolutionary protests largely peaceful?
There are a number of reasons for that. The first one, you don't have the geographical factor like what's in Libya, for example, the East and the West. There's a kind of competition, discrimination, and you don't have the sectarian factor like what's happening in Syria and in Yemen, where you have the Shia, Alawite, and the Sunni. And you don't have the army involvement in the political arena, what happened in Egypt, for example. That's why you would have this kind of peaceful protest so far, in addition to the two main parties, An-Nahda, the opposition party, and Nida Tunis, the ruling party. They're in good term, they're on the same page in terms of compromise, in terms of a kind of reconciliation, national agenda, where both of them consider Ansar Sharia, for example, the version of Daesh in Tunisia, as a terrorist organization. They're against both of them, the Islamist and the secularist. They're against the radicalization of the terrorist group. But is this going to hold? It depends on the environment in the region. You have the war in Libya. inviting more of the Tunisians. You have many of the foreign fighters coming from Tunisia. They're being radicalized in Syria as well. It depends on how the environment will continue to create more incubator for these kind of radical young people, or if you work on settling the whole region, then conditions in Tunisia will be good, and it's going to be hailed again as the success story of the Arab Spring.
Okay, Ahmed Al-Burai, thanks so much for coming in.